This is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3.
Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoyed every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Welcome to the world this Wednesday, January 29th. I am so glad you are here with me. First of all, yes, there's a freeze. No, there's not a freeze. Yes, there's a freeze. No, there's not a freeze. This is what I was talking about. Donald Trump is going to be his own worst enemy. Overreach, doing things in a, frankly, stupid way. I don't know if you saw the Reuters poll that came out, but just about everything Donald Trump has done so far, massive numbers of Americans surveyed don't like. From 59% to 77% don't like pretty much anything you can think of that he's done so far. Did you forget how much you didn't like him last time around? Did you just, were you just so mad at Joe Biden that you thought, what the heck? I don't know. But I think a lot of people are going to remember how much they disliked him. A little bit later today, we're going to be talking to our good friend Spencer Critchley. Remember, he is serializing his new book. You can get the chapters on dastardlycleverness.com. Today, we will be discussing Chapter 5 in what I love to refer to as our WCPT book club, From Marx to Theory to Wokeness, Chapter 5. We're also going to be talking to Edwin Eisendrath. I hope you subscribe to his Substack. It's The Democracy, Stupid. We will be talking with him. And I want to start off with a little bit of information that might help you. Though this freeze is no longer, at least as of this moment in time, there's a freeze, there's not a freeze, there's a freeze, there's not a freeze. There is still an information blackout. The CDC is still being prevented from issuing their daily bulletins, about things like disease outbreaks, like the TB outbreak in Kansas. Yeah. And about recalls. Oh, yeah, we're not getting that information either. There is an allergist. Yes, an allergist. Dr. Rubin, I think his first name is Franklin Rubin, but it's Rubin, RUBIN _allergy. And as best he can, he is trying to post on a daily basis to tell you, to share with you the information that would ordinarily have come from the CDC. He is doing his best to scour the information sites that he has access to as a doctor. And if there are recalls, if there are public health warnings, he is trying to bring them to people. Isn't that interesting? Citizens stepping up. I stumbled across him on Instagram. I would assume he is on other platforms as well. But on Instagram, it's Rubin _allergy. And I just, listen to what he has to say, just in case there's something that, would be nice to know about. We're having a huge resurgence of flu and norovirus in this country. The current strain of COVID that's going around, I can tell you from personal experience, and Ray can second this. I had it over Thanksgiving. He had it around Christmas, and it's a bad one. It's not a good strain of COVID. So, Dr. Rubin is doing what he can to keep us apprised of what is going on and what is important. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. Okay. One other thing you may have seen last night or today, that Donald Trump said that, because, he wants to replace all of the federal bureaucracy. He wants to replace every civil servant with a Trump loyalist. And there's all these different ways being floated of how he can get rid of career civil servants, most of them pretty illegal. So he's decided to make an offer. If you work for the federal government, he's offering you can put in your resignation, but he offers that he's going to continue to pay you for like 6 months. Hey, what a great deal. Resign, go home, put your feet up, and still get a paycheck for the next 6 months. There's only one problem with that deal, aside from the fact that it means that a lot of people who have institutional knowledge are going to be gone, and our government is not going to run as well as it did before. That's one problem. But the second problem is Donald Trump doesn't have the authority to make that offer. It's a lie. Oh, yeah, just turn in your resignation and we'll pay you for 6 months. What a great deal. Well, whether or not you think it's a great deal, he doesn't have the authority to make that offer. And what do you think is going to happen if you turn in your resignation? Do you really think you're going to get paid through August? By the man who was famous for cheating contractors? He'd hire people to work in his hotels, to build his hotels, and then he would famously not pay them. And then when they tried to take him to court, he would countersue. And then he would finally, if he paid them at all, he would pay them pennies on the dollar. There was a famous story for one of his hotels. He hired this company to bring and install some big chandeliers in, I guess, the public areas. And then he stiffed the company, wouldn't pay them. They went back into the hotel and they took the chandeliers out and left with them. If you've done the drywall, you really can't do that. But I thought that was just tremendous. This was the guy's reputation. And why anybody continued to work for him, I don't know. Because he famously would not pay people what he promised to pay them. Do you think he has changed? Do you really? Do you think he's a new man? When I can tell you for sure he's promising something that legally he cannot offer, he cannot back up. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine, Tim Kaine thinks that if you are a federal employee and you are even for a moment considering this quote-unquote buyout, you had better think twice. He was a little bit more blunt in what he said. Listen to Democratic Senator Tim Kaine.
And they received an email that said, from the administration, if you tender your resignation by next Friday, we will guarantee you payment through the end of September, whether or not you show up for work. So tender your resignation, and then, boy, it's just going to be a gravy train. You're just going to get paid for 7 months without working. The president has no authority to make that offer. There's no budget line item to pay people who are not showing up for work. This is a guy who made this promise to contractors again and again and again when he was a private business guy. Oh, come work for me on my casino. Come work for me in a hotel. We're going to do a handshake. We're going to do a contract. The contractor does the work and then finds out they get stiffed. So my message to federal employees who receive this is, the president has tried to terrorize you for about a week and then gives you a little sweetheart offer. If you resign in the next week, we're just going to pay you for doing nothing for the next 7 months. Don't be fooled. He's tricked hundreds of people with that offer. If you accept that offer and resign, he'll stiff you just like he stiffed the contractors. He doesn't have any authority to do this. Do not be fooled by this guy. You were here before he was here, and you'll be here after he was here. Show up for work, be diligent, serve Americans every day, make their life better, answer their phone call, give them an answer, track down their constituent call. Don't be fooled by a fake offer that because he's terrorized you in the last week, it would be easy to just resign now and get a check for 7 months, because I can tell you that promise is worth nothing.
He's right. It isn't worth the paper it's not written on. Somebody said to me once. Yeah, it's Donald Trump being Donald Trump. And I know that the federal government has rescinded this freeze, which, by the way, wouldn't have gone into effect anyway, at least not until February 3rd, because it was stayed by a judge, because, of course, a lawsuit was immediately brought against it. Yeah, this has been, let's see, a disaster? Something that blew up in their face? What's the best way? What's the best way to describe it? You know who described it really well? Minnesota governor, former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz gave a press conference, and he talked about this freeze and, again, told us very bluntly what he thought about it. Listen to this press conference from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
Donald Trump's reckless action cut off funding to law enforcement, farmers, school, child care, veterans, and health care. While he was out golfing, he threw the country into crisis. This is not bold. It's not leadership. It's stupid, buffoonish, childish of exactly what they did. Most folks were up all night last night as we dealt with this being thrown on there with no guidance. I know you have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions because not one damn person thought this through. I'm hearing within the last few minutes, oh, no, the Medicare thing was just a fluke. It's unrelated to this. That is there is absolutely no way they didn't know exactly what they were doing.
What was that, Governor? What was that got beeped out? Our lieutenant governor and our governor also responded really, I think, eloquently to this federal funding freeze, the freeze that, oh, wait, no. Oh, and remember how they said Medicaid would not be affected, but somehow the Medicaid federal portal for all 50 states was not working. Oh, no, it's not affecting Medicaid. Payments are still going through, except they weren't. That was a lie. I thought our lieutenant governor, Julia Stratton, was particularly forceful in how she talked about the freeze that is no longer, but might be again in the near future. Listen to Lieutenant Governor Stratton.
The Trump administration has made an unquestionable declaration of where their values lie. This is an attack on the nation's most vulnerable populations. To cut seniors off from food or strip access to health care from critical patients is a display of cruelty driven by the values of this new administration. If it feels like you are being asked to subscribe to a nation fueled by hate over hope and retribution over problem solving, you are not imagining things. Whatever you are feeling right now is justified. And because the actions taken today do not respond to the very real needs of everyday Americans, you're going to hear a lot of noise. Hear me when I say, no amount of backpedaling can override the truth they just dropped at our feet. This dizziness, this nausea, the panic, it's all intentional. It is not a mistake that websites are suddenly going dark just as people start to ask questions. This level of chaos was intended when President Trump and the people in his ear made these decisions. Let's stop ourselves from thinking in numbers and start thinking of faces. A family relying on federal utility support could go cold as soon as tonight. An expecting mother with an ultrasound scheduled tomorrow may still be wondering if Medicaid will cover that appointment. And a nonprofit in your community, meeting the needs of your neighbors, is about to conduct layoffs or close their doors completely. Someone you love will suffer because Trump's administration has chosen to trample on the United States Constitution and dishonor the promises made to the people who elected them.
That woman is on fire. And you know, not that there aren't a large number, but she is one of the people who is, she started a PAC, a political PAC, and while it is not to run for Senate, it could very easily be changed to that. A lot of people are waiting to see what Illinois Senator Dick Durbin decides. He is he has said he's going to let everybody know by August, I think at the latest. He's 80, but he can't decide whether or not he wants to retire or run for another term in the Senate. But already there's a number of people who are raising money, you know, just in case, and she's one of them. She would certainly be a formidable voice, don't you think? I think so, too. Okay, well, you know I'm yammering on as I am wont to do, despite the fact that this first hour is supposed to be for taking calls and reading texts. That, too. 773-763-9278. If you want to text, we've already got a lot of texts. Lady B is there to get your calls. But I do need to talk about Bobby Kennedy Jr., who is in hearings today to see whether or not he is going to be in charge of our whole medical infrastructure. I don't know if it's going to do any good, since obviously there were a lot of people saying bad things about Pete Hegseth, and the Republicans still didn't have the spine to vote him down. But Caroline Kennedy, daughter of John Kennedy, President John Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, wrote a letter to the Senate and posted a video. She said she hadn't spoken out before now because the Biden administration had appointed her to be the ambassador to Australia. And as a White House official, as a government official, she didn't feel it was her place to weigh in on Bobby's efforts to be a part of the new Trump administration. But she is no longer the ambassador to Australia. If you have the time, I don't know where else you can find her entire video. Her son, Jack Schlossberg, posted it on his TikTok. It is, the whole thing is a little bit longer than 6 minutes, and the whole thing is very much worth giving a listen. But I'm going to share with you just a couple of little parts of this video that Caroline Kennedy posted about why Bobby Kennedy Jr., her family member, is utterly and completely unfit, not just a bad administrator, but really a bad person. A bad person she's known since they were little. This is kind of gross, so gird your loins. But I'm going to share with you the one clip that Lady B and I pulled where she specifically says what a bad person Bobby is. Listen to this.
Overseeing the FDA, the NIH, the CDC, and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, agencies that are charged with protecting the most vulnerable among us, is an enormous responsibility and one that Bobby is unqualified to fill. He lacks any relevant government, financial, management, or medical experience. His views on vaccines are dangerous and willfully misinformed. These facts alone should be disqualifying. But he has personal qualities related to this job, which for me pose even greater concern. I've known Bobby my whole life. We grew up together. It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator. He's always been charismatic, able to attract others through the strength of his personality, his willingness to take risks and break the rules. I watch his younger brothers and cousins follow him down the path of drug addiction. His basement, his garage, his dorm room were always the center of the action, where drugs were available, and he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed to his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence. That was a long time ago, and people can change. Through his own strength and the many second chances he was given by people who felt sorry for the boy who lost his father, Bobby was able to pull himself out of illness and disease. I admire the discipline that took and the continuing commitment it requires. But siblings and cousins who Bobby encouraged down the path of substance abuse suffered addiction, illness, and death, while Bobby has gone on to misrepresent, lie, and cheat his way through life.
While Bobby has gone on to misrepresent, lie, and cheat his way through life, this is a man who put baby chickens and mice while they were alive into a blender. Charismatic, yeah, a lot of psychopaths are, but that sounds pretty antisocial and dangerous to me. But again, will this have any effect? Who knows? You know what? Who knows? Because, they knew Pete Hegseth was unfit and voted for him anyway. So will this matter? Who knows if it's going to make any difference at all. Real quick before we go to break and I go to the phone lines, Jim Acosta left CNN. Jim Acosta was a thorn in Trump's side, and many people believe CNN wanted to demote him as a sop to Donald Trump. Instead, Jim Acosta has decided to leave. This was how he said goodbye on his show yesterday. Listen to this.
People often ask me if the highlight of my career at CNN was at the White House covering Donald Trump. Actually, no. That moment came here when I covered former President Barack Obama's trip to Cuba in 2016 and had the chance to question the dictator there, Raul Castro, about the island's political prisoners. As the son of a Cuban refugee, I took home this lesson. It is never a good time to bow down to a tyrant. I've always believed it's the job of the press to hold power to account. I've always tried to do that here at CNN, and I plan on doing all of that in the future. One final message. Don't give in to the lies. Don't give in to the fear. Hold on to the truth and to hope. Even if you have to get out your phone, record that message. I will not give in to the lies. I will not give in to the fear. Post it on your social media.
Jim Acosta from CNN. They wanted to move him to midnight. They tried to sell him as, well, but it's prime time in L.A. Oh, and by the way, in case you didn't know it, CNN also pulled in Jake Tapper and Anderson Cooper before the inauguration. And the boss said, you know what? Don't mention anything about Trump being a convicted felon or anything negative during our inauguration coverage. And apparently Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper were just fine with that. The one guy who regularly stood up to Trump is now gone. And I hope to God MSNBC hires him. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with your calls after this.
There's no excuse to miss Joan Esposito.
It's number one on my stereo.
Live, local, and progressive. You can listen to her daily at WCPT820.com on your computer or phone.
All this year, WCPT is celebrating our 20th anniversary.
The station launched the Progressive Talk format on May 3rd, 2005, as an affiliate of the Air America Network.
And soon began airing nationally broadcast radio programs hosted by Tom Hartman,
Stephanie Miller, Randy Rhodes, Ed Schultz, Rachel Maddow,
Al Franken, Janine Garofalo, Mark Maron,
and even Jerry Springer.
After Air America went off the air in 2010, WCPT produced programs hosted by Chicago media fixtures like Dick Kay.
And launched what is now the station's longest-running local show, Out Chicago,
with Scott Duff and Ellen Miller.
More recently, Joan Esposito, Edwin Eisendrath, Hal Sparks, Richard Chu, and me, Patty Vasquez, have been added to the lineup.
And Stephanie, Tom, and Randy are still with us.
WCPT will be marking this 20th anniversary milestone with special features
and a very special event in May.
We'll be announcing all of the exciting details about that soon.
So stay tuned.
And thank you so much
for helping make WCPT
Chicago's Progressive Talk for 20 years.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Want to join the conversation?
I just wanted to thank your station for consistently reporting the facts.
In a world of clickbait headlines, your station is who I trust for the real news.
Call Joan now at 773-763-9278 and join the conversation. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820.
We spend the first hour of our broadcast talking about the news of the day and taking your calls. So let's get to those phone lines, shall we? Let's go to Dan, who's on the north side of Chicago. Hey, Dan, how are you?
Yes, hi. Hi, Joe. Yeah, I just was concerned about the character of this man, Donald Trump. And what I feel that he really doesn't have the character or the personality to be a leader or a president.
Correct.
And as you know, Nancy tried to impeach him back in the day. It was just something that had to do with Vladimir Putin and his relationship with him, or some other kind of financial things. He got
impeached twice in his first. In his first term as president, he was impeached twice, but both times the Senate did not vote to remove him from political life.
I see. Okay, thanks for telling me that. So I don't know if his character and some of the things that he's done so far would allot that sort of thing, this impeachment and this trial, because they've already got information about other things that he's done. And
Dan, there are some people who've said, he should be impeached again, but it's probably not possible, because impeachment, to vote on impeachment, is something that's done in Congress, in the House of Representatives. And Mike Johnson would most certainly do everything in his power to prevent that from happening. So, even if it could happen, it wouldn't go anywhere in the Senate, where Republicans have a majority. So it would. I'm not saying that it's, even if you're going to lose, it's not worth doing. But we've impeached this guy twice, and it didn't slow him down. I think it makes more sense to look at each and everything he's trying to do and take him to court over it. I think the Democrats should have a big fund, and every time he signs an executive order, it should be challenged by lawsuits. It should be challenged in the court. That's going to frustrate him a lot more than another impeachment, I think.
I can understand that. It might be possible, though, to keep bringing the impeachment up, bring it up until they just get so sick of it and so tired of it that they have to put it through the court.
Yeah, or in the midterm elections, we retake the Senate and the House, and to the point where we can actually, have some power. we could impeach him then. I believe it takes 2/3 of the Senate, though, to convict. And that would be difficult. But, I understand, you're right. In a sense, I think we should do everything possible to resist him and slow him down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's nothing but a troublemaker.
No.
Okay, thanks a lot, Joe. Okay,
Thanks.
take it easy.
Thanks for the call, Dan. I appreciate that. Jim from Chicago is on the line. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Joan. I see that Dr. Phil joined the Emperor's Imperial Guard in Chicago.
Yeah.
To shackle the immigrants, but I'm sure that Trump had this in mind. He could give psychological help to people that are shackled. I'm sure that he could. I'm sure that would help. As you're being lifted off to some country, you don't know where you're at. But what about this newsroom? It's going to be influencers. The journalists are going to be influencers. Now, who influences anybody is beyond me. Joe, I can honestly say I've never been influenced by anybody in my life. But apparently they have influencers going into the White House, and they're going to influence
that was
other
something
people.
the new press secretary announced, that it was no longer, the White House press briefings were no longer going to be just for what they call legacy media, Washington Post, NBC, ABC, etc., but that influencers, TikTok influencers, social media influencers were also going to be included. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I saw this at one source. She said that because it's kind of the first question is kind of a big deal. She said that in the future, influencers would be turned to first to ask the first question in any briefing. So forget ABC, NBC, CBS, heck, even Fox, heck, even Breitbart. It's going to be, we're going to TikTok, okay? Joey from TikTok. Is there something you'd like to ask me, Joey?
Right. And they've all been rehearsed. But I was going to say, I went to the library today, and, the section on Trump's books are getting ridiculously large now. And Lou Dobbs, that nut, has a book out, The Trump Century. Now, that's how crazy these people. That's how repulsive. Well, you know what's interesting about that, Joan? They get big contracts to write these books. That's what this weird thing is. I mean, who reads these things? I can't understand it.
That's a very good question. Remember, there was during the first Trump administration, I don't know if one of his kids wrote a book, and then it was revealed that the Republican National Committee had bought like 25,000 copies so that the book would appear on the bestseller lists. It was somebody in Trump's immediate orbit and they artificially propped up the book so it would look like it was doing better.
Who was the host? That he was inappropriate with women also. They're advertised. I can't think of it. Irish. He's got an Irish last name. Oh God Almighty! He was on TV for a long time. But anyway, he's going to have a show on TV. Now they're putting on Dog the Bounty Hunter because he's pro-Trump. He's got a Trump hat on. Well, he's chasing poor people for their because they can't pay their bonds. In the meantime, this guy's the biggest criminal we've ever experienced. Yep. But anyway, Joan, these news conferences should be a hoot. They should be a hoot.
Well, anyway. She's only like 27 years old, the new press chief, but she's been in political life a long time. She actually ran for Congress when she was 23. So I don't think, everybody was talking about how, she seemed very well prepared, and she was certainly very feisty. And it didn't mean she was truthful, though, because she said a lot of stuff that wasn't true.
She sounds like she's nuts. Absolutely. I was thinking of Bill O'Reilly. That's what I was thinking of. Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah, he's back with a vengeance, and he's back with a vengeance. And he was one. He was another one that couldn't treat the opposite sex
and
with
did you see,
any dignity.
J.D. Vance's press chief is Tucker Carlson's son.
Oh my God! Oh, my God. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. What do these guys do when they go to a cocktail party or something? Do they really think they can pull the wool over everybody's eyes in the United States of America?
I have a feeling that if there's nobody who's not in the inner circle and they get together, I think they hoot and holler over what they've been able to do and the lies they've been able to pull out. Because, it was reported, even in some state legislatures, people who were behind the scenes with Republicans when they are able to do something, like in Wisconsin, where they're trying to do the whole voter ID thing. And somebody reported that when the Republicans got together, they were high-fiving one another because they understand that requiring an ID when you come to vote, even though it might seem like pretty logical and not that big a deal, it really takes to task poor people and black people. They get rid of the folks who they believe aren't going to vote for them anyway. Voter ID laws are designed to get rid of some potential voters, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
And they're big money donors. 50%, it's got up to 50% now. It's like 100 of these big money donors and put in 50% of their political life, get them. And remember, they're also at the party, laughing up their sleeve as they fleece America. And I don't, all I can say is, I just hope he doesn't suspend the election. I'm sure they're throwing that around. Suspend the midterms. You just go right to dictatorship. Why are you fooling around? I think somebody's whispered his ear for that.
I'm sure that would be something he would like to do. Without question, that would be something he would like to do. But I think that we will still, as a country, hold together through the next 2 years so that even Republicans won't go along with that. That's my hope. We have 640 some days to hang on. Oh my goodness, sounds like a long time.
And 6 crazy Republican judges in the Supreme Court, they probably entertain it. 2 or 3 would entertain it. That's not a bad idea. Anyway,
really.
Joan, thanks a million for taking my call.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jim.
Joe.
We are going to take a break. We are going to get back to the phone lines right after this.
Podcasts of Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Amazon. Just search for Joan Esposito.
Because facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are taking your calls up until 3 o'clock. So let's go back to the phone lines right now where our good friend Bobby from Indiana is waiting patiently to weigh in on the news of the day. Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Hey, Joni, it's me, the other bad Bobby.
Oh, you're looking a lot better, I think, than the other Bobby.
Yeah, you thought I was so terrible, but all of a sudden, with the other. But, yesterday I got out over my skis, and you corrected me. It's not legislation that he's doing. It's executive orders.
Mm-hmm. Yep, just sitting there writing them. This sounds good. Let's write up an executive order. Actually, the truth is, he's not even writing most of them. They are being written, in some cases, by the people who wrote Project 2025. He's not writing these executive orders. They're preparing them, and they're just piling them up on his desk, and he is just signing them. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Probably a hand stamp. But virtually all of them are so draconian and mean and hateful and or just downright stupid that I wonder if weans on our side of the coin might be making a mistake in even calling them executive orders with him. Wouldn't we be better calling them Trump tantrums?
Oh, I like that. Yes.
Think about it.
I like that.
Sleep on it. Okay?
Yeah, thank you for that, Bobby.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for a good turn of phrase, and that certainly fits the bill. Trump tantrums. There was another Trump tantrum today. This is what he signed today.
Whenever he soils his diaper, he gets a little, edgy, and then he'll crank out another one of these things.
Oh, he'll crank out another one whenever the Heritage Foundation tells him to. I mean, this isn't a guy who's thoughtful. This isn't a guy with, plans. I mean, this is a guy who is so easily manipulated that the tech bros, they understood. They understood that they could buy him. They understood that with enough campaign donations, they could change his mind. He was against electric vehicles. He was against crypto. Now, all of a sudden, with Elon Musk writing him big checks, those things don't look as bad as they used to. I mean, this is a guy. He can be bought. I mean, he's for sale.
Oh, yeah. You got that right.
Anyway, Bobby, thank you for the Trump tantrums. I'm going to use that going forward, and I'll try to give you credit. Okay, I'll give you credit once in a while. Thanks for the call.
Fair enough.
Let's go to Chicago. Our good friend Ron is on the line. Hey, Ron, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Let's all hope that there will never be a Project 2026.
Oh, God. Really? Amen to that.
Yeah. And Dr. Phil started as a lawyer, but he couldn't cut it, so he became a psychologist. Lucky for us.
I don't really, I don't really know a lot about his background. I've never taken the time, nor am I going to take the time now. He's an opportunist. He was presented with an opportunity to, publicize his new network and his new show because, you just can't have enough money. I think that's the operative philosophy with Dr. Phil. How can I make more money?
Right. So in the White House, we are going to have a Dr. Phil and a Dr. Oz and maybe later a Dr. Zhivago from Russia.
I think that one's already there, Ron.
Oh, he's there? Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah, though, did you see, apparently in his efforts, because, he's ending the war in Ukraine, he was going to do it as soon as he was elected, and then he was going to do it on the first day of his presidency, and then we were told it was going to take 100 days, then we were told that it might take 6 months. Mm-hmm. Apparently, so far, none of his suggestions are being taken up by Vladimir Putin, who most recently was asked by, I don't know if it was by us, whether he would sit across the table from Zelensky, and Putin said no, because he doesn't think Zelensky is he's not a legitimate ruler. He's not a legitimate government person. Because, despite what that one troll, Greg, calls in and says, Putin doesn't believe that Ukraine exists. Putin believes that it's some sort of country that was created out of whole cloth, that it's actually a member, like it was before. It should be a member of the Soviet Socialist Republic. It doesn't exist. Therefore, he can't meet with Zelensky, because that would be acknowledging that the fact that Ukraine is a real country, and he refuses to do that. So.
Yeah, and Trump was asked yesterday about the freezing the Home on Wheels program, and he said, well, let their neighbors cook for them. That's brilliant.
Yeah, as part of that government freeze, for those of you who somehow missed it, Head Start funds were frozen. A lot of food programs were frozen, including Meals on Wheels. That was one of the things that suddenly had its funding cut off.
Yeah, and he had another brilliant idea today that instead of getting our coffee from Colombia, we'll have our coffee grown in Hawaii.
Okay. You know what? I'm sure if the climate in, Hawaii grows some great coffee, Kona coffee, and that's fine. That's a great idea. We should, we should grow coffee in Hawaii. We should do a lot of things. That doesn't mean that people aren't still going to want Colombian coffee, because that's a special kind of coffee. And if we increase the amount of coffee we grow ourselves, all the better. But it's not going to be a substitute. Plus, I learned this. Did you know that a lot of our fresh flowers come from Colombia? A lot of we import a lot of flowers, and with Valentine's Day being about 2 weeks away, it is prime flower buying season. Some people think that that's actually part of the reason why Colombia capitulated as quickly as they did, is because that a lot of their flower sellers would have been grievously hurt if they couldn't take advantage of the U.S. Valentine's Day market. So, yes, coffee and flowers we get from our neighbor to the south.
Good. All right. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Let's go to our good friend Steve, who is calling in from the Gold Coast. Hello, Steve.
Yes, and this is pretty much what we all expected. You would think that there would be just somebody there at the White House, adult enough to say, it is the case that perhaps we can address things like government waste or fraud and whatnot. A lot of Americans agree with that. I certainly think that there is waste and fraud in government, but we don't do it overnight, and you certainly don't do it by throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There are a lot of very good programs, and even if you think that you perhaps want to scale them down, if you want to eliminate them, there's a reason why if we pass a law in this country, we don't say that we passed it at 6 p.m. at midnight, it's in effect. No, we give the world time to adjust. And this notion of we're just going to cut everything off, and, as you've already discussed, Meals on Wheels. There are a lot of elderly people in this country who rely on that program. It is literally an essential part of their nutritional needs. They rely on Social Security, and beyond that, they rely on something like Meals on Wheels. Sometimes that's the only person they have contact with in the entire day, if they're living by themselves. And so this idea of, okay, we'll just throw it all out and, we'll just figure out how to put it all back together down the road is not how responsible people conduct public policy. But, this is what happens when children and idiots are in charge. And so what a surprise that, they have to backpedal. And what a surprise that, oh, my God, I'm not going to be able to lower grocery prices like I promised. I'm not going to be able to bring an end to the war in Ukraine like I promised. The whole we were going to be winning. Yeah, people seem to have forgotten. We didn't get tired of winning because we weren't winning the first time around. Why are you surprised that he's backpedaling on promises that adults knew couldn't be fulfilled?
Because there are no adults. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. There are no adults. And you know what? This is what Trump did in his last go round as president. He doesn't care about what's legal and what's not. He throws a bunch of stuff out there and waits to see what happened. And, if there are lawsuits and stuff gets struck down, then eventually he'll tell you it wasn't his idea anyway, and he never supported it. And then eventually he'll tell you it never happened. But sometimes some of this stuff that seems so egregious and so outrageous ends up surviving a court challenge. I think Mark Elias said that in his first administration, of all the lawsuits, the famous democracy lawyer Mark Elias and his firm, of all the lawsuits that they brought, they were successful more than 90% of the time. But that also means that there were a number of lawsuits they brought that did not succeed. And Trump doesn't care about what the regulations say. He doesn't care about what the law is. He's like, I'm going to do what I want to do. And, if you want to challenge me, so be it. I don't care what the law says. I want to see what I can get away with. And the more I throw at you, the more I bury you in this stuff, the more I'm going to get away with. I think that's the Trump guiding rule.
Oh, absolutely. He has no respect for regimes or order. He has no respect for democratic institutions. I mean, this question of, okay, let's assume we can get away with this. Is it a good idea in terms of our democratic traditions that we do this? Despite the fact that, we might be able to get away with it, especially given this court, is it a good idea? I don't think Donald Trump ever has these thoughts, ever has these discussions. But I mean, this is what happens when someone like Donald Trump, seizes the most important office in the world. I'd like to think that other presidents, and I know for a fact that they do, they have these discussions about, that there's sometimes a balancing act. Sometimes, you have to take from here to give to there. And there's a moral dilemma and an ethical dilemma there. But with regard to Donald Trump, everything is transactional. It's what's good for me. Mm-hmm. And I really don't care about all of that stuff that those, big-headed people who sit around doing research think. I don't read anything. I'm just going to, as you say, the shotgun approach to public policy. I'm going to shoot everything at the wall and see what sticks. And,
exactly.
And if it doesn't stick, then I'll just blame the deep state, liberals. Because
they're already doing that. For even the pushback they're getting. Oh, it's that deep state we said we were going to get rid of. Look, they're thwarting us. By God, they're thwarting us. How dare they? Steve, thank you. We got to get to news. Thank you so much for the call. Hey, when we come back after this, we are going to talk to James West, the executive editor of Mother Jones magazine. They had a scoop about RFK Jr. that we are going to talk about right after the news.
You're the only voice of reason on the radio.
You give me hope.
Having listened to you every day.
Thank you for your clear insight.
Always felt a little bit smarter.
I listen to you every single day.
I keep coming back to this station, and thank you for what you do.
On WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hey, Google, play WCPT.
Streaming Chicago's Progressive Talk from TuneIn.
Time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you. From, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I am very pleased to welcome James West to our airwaves, the executive editor of Mother Jones. James, how are you today?
Gosh, what a day, what a few days.
That's a loaded question, isn't it? I'm sorry.
2025, right? Like, what is happening? How are you doing?
Most days, James, I have a stomach ache. And I don't think it's due to dairy. I think it's due to politics. I get the stomach ache shortly after I start the show. Yeah. But I am determined. I am determined to refuse and resist and do whatever it takes to keep my audience hopeful. And because I think that giving up is not an option.
That's right. And I think there's also an important reminder of what happened in the first Trump administration was this fuselage of chaos is actually the point in and of itself, right? It means that people cannot focus on the signal through the noise. People are pushed back on their feet. They can't work out what the hell is going on because there's so much chaos. And I think that's a governing tactic of the Trump administration. We saw that in the first administration. He's doing that even more this time around. So it's even more important, I think, to keep your bearings, to focus on what's important, and to take every hour as it comes, lest we get completely overwhelmed.
And I also think that I was talking about this yesterday on air. Legacy media doesn't seem to be fighting for democracy the way I thought they would. And I've been telling the audience it's time to turn away from the mega voices, Washington Post, New York Times, and to look at sources that are smaller and less intimidated. Things like Mother Jones, things like Washington Monthlies, things like The Nation. It seems like our smaller, ProPublica, smaller, more independent outlets are the only ones really speaking truth to power these days.
well, we will take whatever reader that you send our way, Joe. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think there's a real role for nonprofit journalism right now, especially when you see the consolidation of power in what we are calling the broligarchs, these sort of tech overlords who, sat in the row behind Trump as he was sworn in. This is an immense sort of consolidation of power that was being shown off there. And these are the people that sort of run the algorithms that are delivering people's news into their news feed every day. The Trump administration has already allied itself with Musk on X, formerly known as Twitter, of course. And so we've got one social media network in his pocket already, and we all saw Mark Zuckerberg's sort of reaction to Trump's election, which was a kind of wet kiss, for want of a better word, on for how he plans to do things at Facebook and Instagram at the parent company Meta. So things aren't looking good on the algorithmic front, which is why I think it's important to seek out independent, fact-based journalism, like you say.
And you would think that outlets that don't have billions behind them would be the ones most worried. But as you pointed out, it's Elon Musk, it's Jeff Bezos, it's Mark Zuckerberg. They're all kissing the ring. They're all changing their platforms. Even Google, for God's sake, announcing yesterday, well, you know what? We're going to go along with that. On our Google Maps, we're going to change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. The first thing I did when I read that is I deleted Google Maps from my phone. You know what? I'm not putting up with that.
There was an issue of Mother Jones magazine that we put out last year called American Oligarchs that actually captured this movement, I think, well before others did. I feel like the word oligarch is now entering into the mainstream in a really useful way, because now we have a word that describes what's going on here, which is the consolidation of power among a few terrifyingly wealthy people who literally get to write the laws of the country now, or at least are in partnership with it. We see DOGE, the annoyingly named new department, quote unquote,
or as my listeners like to call it, dodgy.
Well, that's a good name. I mean, this is a transparent attempt, I think, to have little or no oversight on government cuts. We interviewed Elizabeth Warren last week, who herself has sort of identified, hey, if you want to actually go cut some government expenditure, what about these other things? The funding of the military to this regard and down the list. But of course, Musk and his lot aren't interested in doing that. They're interested potentially in feathering their own nest with government contracts. So this is something that we
Elon told us
watching.
The whole point of DOGE is we're going to live on Mars. Everything, we got to cut all this so we have enough money to set up those cities on Mars,
Yeah, well, there would be a lot of people that say he's welcome to Mars at this point if we can pop him in a one-man rocket.
Or as Jackie Gleason used to say, to the moon, Alice.
Yeah, that's right. So that's
Sorry,
Musk
dated
and our
myself
friends,
there.
and we've been keeping
you
an eye on
them.
them.
Who that is.
I'll quickly Google that one, Jane.
Okay, all right. James, we need to, Lady B, I'm going to take this break a little early because Mother Jones has a scoop about Bobby Kennedy Jr., and I don't want to start talking about that and have to take a break. So let's take our break right now. James West, executive editor of Mother Jones Magazine, and I will be right back after this.
Take Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, with you on the go by using the TuneIn app on your phone. Just search for WCPT 820.
Out Chicago.
How are you doing,
I am immersing myself in as many positive experiences, i.e. theater, music, whatever I can do.
Look, I keep going back to doing your joy homework.
Yes.
During this point, joy is a practice. Yes. And you have to actively seek out the things that bring you joy.
Catch Out Chicago every Sunday, 11 to 1 on WCPT 820. WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter.
Attention, everyone. Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I'm joined by James West, Mother Jones' executive editor. And Mother Jones had a scoop about Bobby Kennedy that had to do with his divorce. Remember, he divorced his wife and she later committed suicide. He was accused of gaslighting her on a bunch of things, and an already wounded woman killed herself as a result. Well, there is more that has come out that was part of their divorce proceedings. James, what can you tell us about this?
David Cornell, D.C. bureau chief, published this last night ahead of today's confirmation hearings, and Mother Jones was able to obtain a cache of recordings, audio recordings, of more than 60 conversations that RFK Jr. made secretly during this bitter, protracted, messy divorce saga back from 2011, early 2012. And at least one of these recordings, it may be said that it could have been illegally made without her consent due to what's known as one-party consent laws in the state of California. So these audio recordings were secret. And on them, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of drama about this relationship, and you can read it in the actual article. But one of the revelations in it was that they went back and forth about Bobby Kennedy's infidelity, at which point he appears to admit to or acknowledge what he describes as what they describe in the conversation as polygamy in the actual recording. Now, that may be a kind of casual turn of phrase or one that's in the audio recordings, but certainly is revelatory in that conversation. And there are also new details of a filing that was never made in court in rebuttal to one of RFK's affidavits in the divorce proceedings. So it adds new information to quite a tragic chapter, clearly in their personal lives, and also provides a kind of back history to their marriage.
He was described as a very bad man by his cousin Caroline Kennedy. This would seem to corroborate her description of him as simply not a good human being.
Well, that's right. I think there's excuse me for one sec. I just need to cough one second. Sorry about that. I'm getting over a little bug here. There's a lot of backstory about RFK that that makes a lot of that paints in a picture of a complicated man who has undergone a big transition in his life from being an addict to being in several messy marital arrangements. And a lot of people are now on the record, including his cousin, the former ambassador to Australia, my home country, who came out last night with a kind of shocking, searing letter indictment of him, calling him a predator and revealing all sorts of things about his youth that I think wasn't on the record before. So a startling and dramatic entry to a day today which saw a lot of drama in front of the confirmation hearings.
And in addition to the fact that she says he's a predator and said that he lies and cheats his way through life, she also talks about an ethics violation, which, if you're recording your soon-to-be ex-wife to try to get something to use against her, you're not the greatest guy in the world to start with, but apparently he's involved in a lawsuit against the maker of the HPV virus vaccine. And, she said, one thing I learned when I was ambassador to Australia is that worldwide cervical cancer is the third largest killer of women. And HPV has been taken by millions of women and is proven to be effective against cervical cancer. But he would rather go after the manufacturer and profit off of this than promote something that actually is good for people.
Yeah, I think this is. Yeah, I think this is one of the sort of ongoing questions about his rise potentially to the cabinet here is his ongoing relationships with law firms that sue vaccine makers and who may try to, push various kinds of policies related to litigation and potentially reducing vaccine availability. This is one of the big things I think that hangs over his candidacy here, including, his not so successful efforts to distance himself from his vaccine skepticism today. In his hearings, he was basically, paraphrasing here, but no, of course, I'm not a vaccine skeptic, but of course there are books out, there's endless amounts of podcasts. I think it only took about 6 minutes for him to lie about his record in front of the senators today.
I think that Democratic Senator Ron Wyden actually had some of his quotes from podcasts where he talked about being anti-vaccine, and Ron Wyden looked at Bobby Kennedy Jr. and said, "So were you lying then, or are you lying now?"
Right, and there were some other good exchanges today as well, whether they landed a punch, whether they drew blood, so to speak, whether his candidacy is in question. Notably there was bipartisan grilling, I think, in a way that you didn't see during some of the earlier confirmation hearings, like Pete Hegseth, for example. So we'll see, but it was a tough day to defend a very shaky record in front of the Senate.
And I don't know if you caught this. It was I think they put it out on Sunday. The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal came out against Bobby Kennedy. The editorial board, first of all, they took Trump to task for pardoning the January 6 folks, and now they published this editorial on Sunday, why RFK Jr. is dangerous to public health. He's made millions from referring clients to trial lawyers, and he advocates mass tort litigation that would ruin the vaccine industry. I mean, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, I've spoken about this to the audience before. I love the Wall Street Journal reporting, but I almost never read the editorials because they make my blood boil, because they are so right-wing and so pro everything that I stand against. And lately it's like, who are these people? Are they coming over to my side? Are they crossing the fence over to the beautiful side of democracy? But, do you think, James, we just saw what happened with Pete Hegseth, arguably the single most unqualified person to ever be put up as a cabinet nominee. And then, of course, Tom Tillis promising his former sister-in-law, just publish all this stuff you know about him, and I promise you I will vote against the nomination. And, of course, it was a lie. So if they're willing to put somebody who is a clear problem drinker and potentially a rapist as head of our military, do you really think anything is going to stop them from putting Bobby Kennedy as our health czar?
I mean, what's interesting to me about the Wall Street Journal, and there's been, conflicting reports over the years about how much influence Rupert Murdoch, the owner, exerts over the editorial pages. But it's Murdoch, right? Like he is the owner, the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, among others, and he's known to have an influence on the editorial direction of these outlets. And so it's a sort of interesting dynamic there. What is this other aging oligarch media owner trying to say through the pages of his paper? And one can only assume that he doesn't want this guy for whatever reason to rise to this level. I mean, I do agree. I think all bets are off. Who knows how willing some of the Republican senators are to break here. I know that former Vice President Mike Pence has been quite strident, much more from a right-wing perspective about abortion and Bobby Kennedy's candidacy. So there's a lot of people on the right who think that he's too left, and a lot of people on the left who think that he has a very patchy record on all of this stuff. So it'll be really interesting to watch. I think anybody who is trying to gaze into a crystal ball and come up with what's happening is just going to be bowled over and contradicted, actually.
I have found that when you are counting on Republicans to do the right thing, you are really going out on a limb. It just seems that over time, and even some Republicans who know better, are using the excuse, well, the president has a right to have whomever he wants in his cabinet. And so even if I think they're unqualified, if it's who the president wants, maybe I should vote for them. I suspect, and, maybe this is wishful thinking, but I suspect there are a lot of Republicans who voted to seat Pete Hegseth who fully believe that in less than a year he will be drunk on duty and he will be fired. I think that rather than stand up to Trump and prevent somebody they know is unfit. I mean, Joni Ernst, I don't know if they took one of her children hostage, how they got her to change her mind. But I think they're counting on the fact that Pete Hegseth will implode. And I think that's a sad state of affairs, James.
I think it displays something that is really extraordinary about this go-around, which is the complete dominance of Trump over the party. I think when we first saw him come into the White House in 2017, there was, you can have your own opinion about their qualifications and who they were, but there were a bunch of people around him who professed to be wanting to limit the damage, to educate him, to make sure that some of his worst impulses weren't felt. Now, of course, all of those people are gone. We could spend an hour going through each one of them, but all of them are gone, and in their place, I think most people now recognize are more effective at doing this stuff. And I think you're right. There's a front-of-house quality to what Republicans are saying and a back-of-house quality. Front-of-house, they're in lockstep. Back-of-house, who knows whether they're going to break ranks or if this kind of fealty to the great leader continues. But as an opening week, we've only seen, I think, what you described, which is pretty much 100% lockstep up and down the chain, because they're really worried about getting primaried. Musk is a really rich person. There's a lot going on there, and Trump is notching up. Do you think that they will be braver
after the midterms when Trump truly is a lame duck and can't hurt them in the election cycle of 2026? Do you think they'll be braver then?
Oh, I have to say I can't even work out what's happening tomorrow morning, let alone what happens in 2 years' time. Or, there's so much that can happen before then, and I think we're witnessing just how quickly history can move right now. And so the head-spinningness of this moment, who knows where we'll be in 2 years, I think. And, it was interesting that the thing that sort of liberated Mitch McConnell seems to be that he's not going to run again and he's not in leadership. And he voted against Pete Hegseth. So, it's a weird moment to find your spine, but...
Well, some people who are more cynical than me believe that the only reason Mitch voted against him is because he knew it wouldn't matter, because he knew there weren't enough votes to really derail the nomination, so he could sort of make a public protest without actually any consequences. But those people are much more cynical than I am. James, I love talking to you. You come from a wonderful country, but I will never forgive you for Rupert Murdoch. I'm sorry, that's always going to be between us.
Can I give you Kate Blanchett and Kylie Minogue? I don't know. Who can I trade?
All right. They sort of offset it. Plus, I love the fact, and I know we're out of time, Lady B. Well, Murdoch lost in court when he was trying to rewrite the terms of his will, and he's afraid that his other kids, if they also take over ownership of Fox, that it won't be as conservative as it used to be. But he lost. And the two sisters and James won, so maybe they can dilute Lachlan after Rupert's gone. We can only hope, James. We can only hope. James West is executive.
What a saga!
Yeah, really, it's like Succession, isn't it? Mother Jones, executive editor. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
A little bit earlier today, I shared with you what Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton said when this federal freeze came down, and she talked about all the suffering that was coming with it. I want to share with you now, at that same press conference was Governor Pritzker, and he also wanted to talk about what was going on at the federal level. Listen to this.
What Donald Trump tried to do in the last 24 hours is illegal. Let's be clear. This is a demonstration of cruelty against people who depend on us. Working families who rely on federal assistance to pay their rent, people who need help paying their utility bills, parents who need critical programs like Head Start for quality, affordable childcare, and 3.5 million Illinoisans who get their health insurance through Medicaid. Despite what the White House press secretary said at the podium earlier, I believe it is my duty to report to you the truth of what actually happened today in Illinois. Donald Trump's administration is lying to you. The White House's attempt to walk back what they did today does not match what we saw on the ground. They assured us that Medicaid would not be affected. That was a lie. Our state agencies were unable to access the Medicaid system until an hour ago, preventing payments for services. And this has been reported from states across the nation. When we reached out to federal agencies, they informed us that they have been directed not to discuss any guidance with states. They have canceled previously scheduled meetings for this week. The White House assured us that Head Start would not be affected. That was a lie. Providers across the state experienced outages, and some were unable to make their payroll. They assured us that they were doing nothing to take away individual assistance from the most vulnerable people in our state, but they refused to say that they would restore LIHEAP, the Low-Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, payments to support the unemployment system, and Meals on Wheels. These are programs that hundreds of thousands of Illinoisans depend on: children, seniors, veterans, working parents. Let's just be clear about what happened over the last 24 hours. At 7:42 p.m. last night, we saw a memo from the White House saying that they were pausing federal funding across the board. This morning, along with all 50 states across the country, we discovered that our ability to access critical federal funding had been cut off. And now the administration would like us to believe that these were just coincidental website outages. Donald Trump and his administration have not earned the benefit of the doubt. They are either lying to us or they are critically incompetent. This is what happens when you staff the federal government full of Project 2025 contributors that don't have any experience governing and don't think that the laws apply to them.
That was Governor Pritzker talking about the federal freeze that was and then wasn't, and now some are saying we might see it again. Joining me now is WCPT radio host Edwin Eisendrath. Also, he writes a Substack called It's the Democracy Stupid. Edwin, thank you so much for being here. What do you think about this? It is. It isn't. It is. It might be.
Joan, they're liars, and they're cruel, and they don't care one bit about what the rest of us know and don't know. They don't think we have any right to have any say in what the government does. How dare we question the king?
Yeah.
I mean, let's just go down the list. Impoundment is illegal, and it will kill people. That's what JB was talking about. It's illegal. They said they had it, then they said they didn't have it, so they're lying. They really said they didn't have it in a 2-line memo in order to stop the judge from, in the case where the states sued, from enjoining them from doing it. They failed. The judge enjoined them. Let's see if they follow the judge's rules or throw us into an even deeper constitutional crisis by ignoring the rulings of the court, which I expect them to do, by the way. It isn't just this. I'm hearing from people in higher ed that I know, people who already have received their grants. They're still being told by their federal agencies that they should hold up spending anything if it could possibly be conceived as being related to DEI or accessibility in any way. This is censorship, government censorship. It's dangerous and it's illegal. Meanwhile, of course, you have that freak show where Bobby Kennedy pretends he's qualified for a job. This is, remember, Pete Hegseth saying, oh, no, this is all about raising standards and having the best people, right? Meanwhile, they're coming for our vote. Let's just be really clear about where they're going. They're doing all of this, but they are going to make it, they're going to try to make it so that we'll never be able to vote them out of office. The SAVE Act, which passed the House, is going to the Senate. This is going to make it much harder for people to vote. They already have a court that said gerrymandering is legal, and we can expect more of it. And we're going to have more efforts like the one in North Carolina, where when they lose an election, they go to their court and try to throw out 60,000 perfectly good votes in order to change the results. These are liars. They are uninterested in our democracy, and they're cruel. And let's just talk about their cruelty for a second. Donald Trump said today he's ordered his team to set up Guantanamo Bay to take 30,000 prisoners, right? To create a mass concentration camp that's away from the press, that's away from oversight, and that's away from American laws. So torture, why not, right? And you won't know who's there because it's not even within the law. So they'll be doing what dictators do everywhere. You and I talk too loudly on this show, you can expect to find me in Guantanamo. And then, it's in line with their January 6th felons and insurrectionists they let out. They're a real danger. I mean, was it just today or yesterday? One of them, got arrested for drunk driving. He resisted, and the sheriff shot him. Mm-hmm. These are dangerous people. Dangerous people. And then, of course, there's the national security questions, which are crazy. Over at OPM, this letter that went out to everybody offering buyouts, and by the way, they aren't buyouts. That's absolutely not what this was. But the letter that went out to me went out because they let Elon Musk plug a private server into the OPM server stack. Remember all that talk about Hillary Clinton's private email server?
Yes.
Well, they just gave Elon Musk access to all of the personnel information in the entire federal government. And when, there's an enormous security problem here. And he sent out this letter that isn't really about buyouts. This is a lawless, corrupt, dangerous administration. They're going to dismiss Eric Adams' case if they can get Eric Adams to say, oh, we like you. The rule of law means nothing to them, right? And meanwhile, what did Trump promise? Egg prices were going to go down. Oh, really? I just came from a restaurant. Guess what hasn't come down? Egg prices. We have institutional chaos across America as people try to figure out what to do when $1.2 billion is yanked out of the American economy in one day by these freezes. And we have international chaos with his, threats to our neighbors everywhere. I mean, just think about PEPFAR. PEPFAR was, I'm sorry for ranting, but forgive me.
No,
PEPFAR was
please, rant
George
away.
Bush's greatest contribution to the world. I'm not a great fan of George Bush. Those wars were unconscionable, but PEPFAR literally saved millions of people from AIDS. It was responsible for almost eradicating AIDS on the continent of Africa. It's an enormous success by every possible measure. And these cruel and bigoted and greedy people stopped it yesterday, and they stopped it not part of the OMB freeze. This was part of the foreign aid freeze, and so we could now see this disease come back. You would think these guys have learned their lessons about diseases, right? Guess
you
not.
would think.
They did and he also promised he would end the Ukraine war on day one.
Oh, yeah.
Russia took another
then
city
day
yesterday.
100, and then I believe the new goal is in 6 months.
Yeah, no, liars. And he was going to get home America. Russia's holding Americans hostage. Oh, I could get them home in a day. Well, guess what? Russia's still holding Americans hostage. And when last I checked, so is Hamas. Now, I think they're scheduled to come home. Biden did that. But again, Trump said on day one, I'm getting those hostages home from Russia. I'm getting them home from Hamas. I'm lowering the price of eggs. He's a liar and he's a danger. So excuse me but if I haven't made my case, I have plenty more evidence.
That's something that I've been thinking about. I think that too many people don't pay attention to actions. They only, this guy's saying what I want to hear. And if you've paid any attention to Donald Trump, you should know by now that he will say whatever it takes to please whatever audience he's in front of if he is looking for your votes. But the fact that people believed that he was going to bring down the cost of eggs, that he said he was going to end the Ukraine war, what does that say about the lack of really good information in our voting public? I worry about the fact that people don't read anymore, that people don't bother to check sources at all. It's like something they saw somewhere on social media, so it was, and they're going with it. It just seems like we have an increasingly ignorant populace, and that scares me, Edwin.
It doesn't scare me. It doesn't. Because,
reassure me.
Here's what we were, people were allowed to vote, who in America before we had the GI Bill that educated a whole bunch of the country. I believe in democracy. I don't think you need to be wildly educated to be able to make a contribution to the direction the country's going. I would like it if people weren't lied to by an endless stream of propaganda that the richest people in the world pay for sure. I think that would help. But you know what? When people didn't trust Democrats this last election. 20 million people who voted for Biden in the last election stayed away. That wasn't Trump gaining voters. And that was, inflation played a big part of that. Joe Biden, who I loved for the things he did, but his politics were not what we needed. He wasn't strong enough and public enough. He didn't show the energy that the country wanted to see because they thought we were going in the wrong direction. Yeah. So I think I'm not giving up on the American people. I'm not blaming Americans or saying, oh my God, all those people who voted for Trump aren't educated. I don't believe that. Some of them are very well educated. And you know what? Not everybody who votes for us is paying that much attention all the time. That's just life. But people have the right and the responsibility to pay at least a little bit of attention. And you know what? People vote for all kinds of reasons, Joan. Some of them vote because the issues matter to them, one issue or another, usually not a whole basket of them. A lot of people vote on affinity. This person feels like me. This person, if he makes a mistake, I understand him and I can forgive him. There's a lot of that. And Donald Trump was very good at that and built one of the most powerful political movements we've ever seen. So
Donald Trump is very good at not talking like a politician. And I think Joe Biden did a lot of really extraordinary things, but he wasn't a great communicator. I mean, do you remember when Bill Clinton was like showing up at the White House press briefings? It felt like every other day going, hey, look, that thing I did. Wasn't that great? Hey, did you see that thing I did? It was really, really good. Pay attention going forward to that thing that I did.
Yeah, and he explained it. Bill was a terrific communicator, one of the best in my lifetime. So all of this, we just can't let them take away our ability to throw them out and fix this problem. It's a big setback for sure. It's cruel. Setting up a concentration camp out of the country in Guantanamo where no one knows what they're doing must not be allowed. Must not be allowed.
Where is it a bridge too far for Republicans, though, since they seem to be very worried about being primaried by Elon Musk's money in the upcoming midterms? Where will the bridge too far be? Sure wasn't Pete Hegseth, seemingly the most unqualified cabinet nominee in my lifetime. So where is the bridge too far? You really don't think they will agree with him?
I don't know if they've got one. You have to be willing to put your country ahead of your own career. You vote on things where you say, I'm going to send people to places where they will die for their country. And if you are swearing an oath and you take on the responsibility to make that judgment, you had better find it in your heart to be willing to lose your job for the country. But maybe they can't.
Yeah. Well, apparently they can't. I mean, what happened to Joni Ernst?
Then we just have to beat them, Joan. Then we just have to. Joni Ernst got bullied.
The woman who was talking about how she has no problem, castrating her hogs. That woman was and has been a big supporter of more efforts to pursue sexual attacks in the military. That woman was our only hope.
No, at the end of the day, our only hope are the American people. That is where sovereignty. I've always, when people say the peaceful transfer of power, it's a nice phrase, and I know what it means in the public's mind, but I don't believe there's a transfer of power. I think the power remains with the Americans. We are sovereign, no one else. And when we decide to fire somebody and hire somebody else, that's on us. We retain the power. The difference this time is these guys are trying to take it. And it isn't, let me just say, it isn't new. It's been going on for easily 15 years where John Roberts and his court have weakened the institutions of democracy, have weakened the ability for our democratic system to work. And they've done it from Citizens United, which dumped all this dark money in, to a series of decisions that undid the Voting Rights Act, to their cynical workaround that lets them now do racial gerrymandering in states. This Supreme Court has been more hostile to democracy than any in my lifetime. And, after Dred Scott, Abe Lincoln said, look, if the laws of our country are written by a Supreme Court that is there for life, then we've lost our liberty. Mm-hmm. It still has to come from the people's representatives. Whereas John Roberts said, oh, you know what? If people don't like what we did, they should just, get used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to Adam Serwer from The Atlantic yesterday and talking about this court. And he said, because I was like, when I was a little girl, it was the Warren Court. And it was like, I grew up believing that the Supreme Court was going to save us and they were always looking out for us. And Adam said, well, actually, if you look at the history of the Supreme Court, it has almost always been a partisan group that serves the people in power. Much more so. He said they're still riding off the glory of the Warren Court, but that has not been the court for most of this country's history, which was kind of eye-opening to me. So
I don't know if I completely agree. I mean, it changed during FDR's term, and that was okay. Maybe it's still most of our history, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah, but remember, FDR threatened the court because they were, every time anything about the New Deal that he was trying to push through came to the court, they were voting it down. And he started publicly talking about expanding the court. And all of a sudden, the decisions that they were making were much more FDR friendly after that. Anyway,
right.
Edwin, we got to take a break. We got to.
All right,
but we will be right back. Edwin and I will be right back right after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Our Saturday host is Edwin Eisendrath. He hosts The Big Picture from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. He also writes a Substack called It's the Democracy, Stupid. And I want you to talk about the one you posted, well, I guess it was just yesterday, where you talked about Congress's cowardly complicity, which I thought was a great turn of phrase, Edwin.
Right. Joan, today, with the week we're in, I could write one every day. What we're seeing from the executive branch, from Donald Trump, and this goes to your question of when Republicans will ever have a backbone. What we're seeing is illegal. It's a break with all of our democratic norms. It's highly dangerous, not just dangerous theoretically, dangerous really. I mean, people will die if these funds are cut off. And I'm not just talking about the PEPFAR problem far away in Africa, although that matters too. Here at home, when you cut grants to hospitals, people will die. Yeah. When you say to universities, close down these particular scientific research projects, then the PhD students and the postdocs who are working on them, you know what? They go find other jobs, and we lose an entire generation of innovation in America. An entire generation. It is as dangerous for us as the Cultural Revolution was for China. It's an enormous setback. You can expect all of the great technologies. I mean, imagine our economy is doing great because, think of the companies that were generated here, big, and Musk is one of them. But all the talent for all of those things will not be here if we shut our universities and shut research in our universities. So all of these, I think, in this piece that you're talking about, I went through some of the, let's face it, counts they could use if they were going to impeach the man again, which they won't. But things that he's doing that are clearly fit all the high crime and misdemeanor definitions. The pardons of the January 6th guys, the birthright citizenship, rewriting the Constitution by fiat, the firing of the career prosecutors in the Justice Department to weaponize the Justice Department, the impounding of federal grants, the ignoring the Supreme Court decision that upheld the law that says TikTok should be out of business by now. All of that is patently illegal. All of it goes after the prerogative of Congress. Do the laws you pass mean anything? Do they or don't they? Yeah. Do we live in an era where the people's representatives make the laws and we have an executive branch that carries them out? Or are you gone now? Are you just gone? And we have, the king says what the laws are and the king carries them out. And by the way, if the courts don't agree, too bad. Because that is tyranny. That our founders knew it was tyranny. And every generation of Americans until now knew that was tyranny. And many generations of Americans, Joan, went to war and fought and died because they knew that was tyranny. And I expect our generation, well, I'm old. I expect younger Americans will not put up with this. They will come to see it, maybe not immediately, but they will come to see it for what it is.
I hope you're right, but I have to tell you, I really thought in this last election that young people would turn out in droves, partly because of Roe v. Wade, partly because Kamala Harris, and they did not. So why not?
Joan, things weren't terrible for them. I mean, terrible enough. Things will get terrible, I'm afraid. I really am afraid about that. But, they've been hearing political people older than them talk about things forever, and Democrats didn't deliver. And what we did deliver, you had to go research to find out about. We didn't, Joe Biden wasn't out there every day saying, here's what we got done, here's what we're doing. And oh my God, in a period of inflation, he called it Bidenomics instead of saying it's Trump's inflation from the way he handled COVID and didn't protect our supply chains. He should have been saying, you know what, I've done a lot for the economy, but that inflation's Trump's. Instead, he owned it. It made it very hard for people who don't really follow politics to be excited.
He was very old school. He got a lot done, but he got it done in a traditional way. And it's like you make your deals, you get things done, you don't brag, you don't crow about it, you move on to the next problem. And I'm sorry, but that was not a good communication strategy for Joe Biden.
And it wasn't, I don't think it was old school. FDR got a lot done, but he had that weekly radio show and he understood the medium. He explained it to everybody. And there's a reason why you can still hear the word Hoovervilles. Yeah. Hoover wasn't that bad a president, but boy, they dumped it all on him.
But I don't know what your listeners say, but my listeners are very, very mixed. And that's putting it as complimentary as I can on Dick Durbin, because sometimes Dick Durbin just seems like, well, this is the way we've always done it, and not acknowledging that there's a new reality and trying to pretend that the Senate is the same as it was 20 years ago. And sometimes Dick Durbin comes out fighting. So I don't know if he runs for re-election, which Dick Durbin we're going to get. But that's what I mean by traditionally this way that, this is how we do it. This is how it works. And we're very decorous and we always wear our ties and we don't do anything new. And I think that did not serve Joe Biden in the long run.
Right. I mean, in Dick's defense, and I don't know if he'll run again. I don't actually think he will. But in his defense, what he focused on most, he achieved in this last term, which was to use his tenure as chair of the judiciary to get as many federal judges appointed as possible. And they got a lot of judges appointed. And that is going to be an enormous firewall in the next few years. I mean, we really need every one of them. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yes. Interesting that you don't think he's going to run again. I also don't think he's going to run again. But, we'll see how things play out. Edwin Eisendrath, Saturday host of The Big Picture from 1 to 4, writes a Substack called It's the Democracy Stupid. Edwin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Joan.
Always a pleasure, my friend. We are going to take a break for news, and when we come back, we are going to be joined by Spencer Critchley. Hope you're. Have you read the newest chapter in his book? We'll talk about it right after the news.
Remember when you get to work to hop over to WCPT820.com or the TuneIn Radio app and stream The Stephanie Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to 11 a.m. on Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter. You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
I want somebody who's passionate. I want somebody who can talk to people like a real person, who can make people feel things, who can make people want to follow them.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
It is time for the WCPT Book Club. Joining us once again is Spencer Critchley. You know him as the author of Patriots of Two Nations. He also does a podcast, Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. And if you go to dastardlycleverness.com, you will find the new book he is writing and releasing chapter by chapter. Spencer, how are you doing today?
Oh, man, Joan, just keep paddling fast like a dog in a swimming pool, trying to keep my head above water, but in this case, it's not water I'm swimming in. It's authoritarianism and corruption. It's everywhere I look.
And, I was here. Tell me what you think. Is this a possible silver lining, that there is so much corruption, there are so many lies, and what they are trying to do is so outrageous, so illegal, so cruel, and so hurtful that they will actually not accomplish it because they're trying to do too much that's too crazy, too fast?
Boy, I sure hope so. And we've seen, some pushback already, thank God, in a couple of cases. I mean, early on with Matt Gaetz, that was a bridge too far, even for the spineless Republicans in Congress. And then with this sudden revocation of all these federal grants and loans, they've backpedaled on that one as well.
And no funding for any kind of cancer research. So let's just bring all that to a halt. Let's make sure that, we're going to stop Meals on Wheels. Oh, no, we're not. We'll let that go through. Oh, we're going to stop foreign aid. Oh, well, not if it's humanitarian aid. I mean, it's like... Right. Does no one know how to craft a memo? Does no one understand? Is it just, this is like, I would expect more from a college intern than what we are getting from this administration. Yeah.
Well, this is part of what's sort of woven deep into the fabric of Trumpism. One way to look at it in historical terms is this is the triumph of the will over reason. Oh. And, that's an ancient struggle in the history of civilization where, there are people who are, if you go back to, at the risk of getting too nerdy about this, if you go back to the Homeric epics, before the time of the great philosophers like Plato, virtue was defined in terms of will and military prowess and achieving your destiny, not the way we assume it should be defined now. Most people who consider themselves to be liberals of some kind, or Christians, or members of other faiths that are based on a moral code, we're used to thinking of virtue in terms of compassion and treating people fairly. And helping each other. But there's this long tradition of the heroic epic of virtue defined as will. And so it goes, from ancient Greece to more recently Nietzsche, who sneered at liberal and Christian values of charity and compassion and saw that as a ruse by the weak to dominate the strong. And, the strong and talented should just follow their wills. Otherwise, we live in a world of slaves. And, you can hear the echoes of that in Trumpism. And, moving forward from Nietzsche in the late 19th century, you get Nietzsche for dummies, as I refer to her, which would be Ayn Rand, who's hugely popular with Silicon Valley tech bros. Yeah. And, those strands come together when you see Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and those folks lining up with Trump and standing in front of his cabinet on the stage at the inauguration. So, if you understand Trump as a creature of pure will, they look at thinking first, and consulting experts and considering the possible unforeseen consequences of your actions. That's the province of puny little pencil-neck bureaucrats with their calculators and spreadsheets, men of action simply see an opportunity and seize it. And so this is a whole alternate universe of a completely different kind of reality, and that can help to understand what otherwise looks so puzzling. But, of course, it doesn't work well. You end up constantly crashing into reality.
It doesn't work well, and it's not working well. The epic
hero becomes a figure of comedy, which, is also part of this. But unfortunately, in this comedy, they're not just tripping over the furniture; they're smashing the institutions of democracy and harming real people.
Yeah, I was just talking to one of our hosts, and I asked him, at what point does it get to be too much? I mean, we had Republicans who were ready to vote against Pete Hegseth, someone with an alcohol problem who's an accused rapist, and yet there wasn't anybody really willing to derail that cabinet nomination. Now we just have this announcement from Donald Trump that he's decided that Guantanamo Bay will make a great place to send as many as 30,000 illegal immigrants, or at least he claims that they will be illegal immigrants. At what point, Spencer, or is there even a point where Republicans say, this is a bridge too far? I realize that Elon Musk might bankroll somebody against me in the coming midterm elections, but this is just a bridge too far. I'm not so sure that I can believe that anybody's going to say that.
No. I mean, essentially nobody. You know, there might be two or three here and there, as we've also seen recently with a few whimpers of objection to, for example, essentially greenlighting the assassination of Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and now Mark Milley by removing their security details, also Anthony Fauci.
Yes, and they're taking his picture down, too. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
General Mark Milley's portrait is coming off the walls.
Yeah, in true Soviet style.
But you know, the lack of the security detail and the picture coming off the walls, you know, so be it. But apparently Pete Hegseth is also talking about sort of retroactively demoting Mark Milley, which would affect basically his retirement and and apparently if Hegseth tries to do that, Mark Milley could challenge it in court. But you know, a lot of military people they've been steeped in not making a big public fuss about anything. My fear is that Milley wouldn't fight back. I don't know, but it's just
I think he will. I think he'll do it in an honorable way, a foreign concept to these people coming after him. This is another feature of this kind of, you know, Greek hero, Nietzschean, Ayn Randian cult of the will and of the epic hero, who is the man of action. It's most attractive to the weakest people, the people who feel inwardly the most powerless and the most cowardly. And so it's almost perfect. It's actually kind of like a Greek drama that you would have somebody as thoroughly dishonorable as Pete Hegseth. I mean, what could be weaker than a man who bullies and assaults women by every indication we have, and who makes such a performance of being a tough guy while constantly failing at life, versus Mark Milley, who, according to everything we know, has led an exemplary life of service and courage. So he is what people like Hegseth and Trump are pretending to be. And I'm sure that they find that as part of what's so offensive, that this is an actual man, you know, in the traditional sense of being a man. And when that was and is, I would hope, taken to mean a person of courage and honor and integrity, not a chest-thumping bully who runs at the first sign of danger, or in the case of Hegseth, who's, you know, Mr. Warrior culture, right? He's going to get all the so-called wokeness out of the military and go back to, you know, warrior values, as he describes it. What's his first act in office? It's an act of abject cowardice and self-humiliation following this utterly dishonorable order from Trump to essentially, as I say, green light for assassination General Mark Milley, whose offense was offending Trump. He basically hurt Trump's feelings, which is, again, such a classic indication of somebody's true character, which is weak and cowardly and without any concept of honor. And this is typical of, you know, these people who are into this cult of the will and cult of power are they never turn out to be actual tough guys. And anybody who's actually served around actual tough guys, whether they're in the military or they could be in any field of life, people who actually do have courage, who actually will stand up even at great risk to themselves, whether it's physical risk or reputational risk or risk to their job. Those people are always the last to thump their chests and to tell you how tough they are and to take offense because they don't need to.
Right.
When you are actually strong, you don't need to constantly prove to other people that you're strong. You don't need this performance. So it's always a tell, and it's so unsurprising, but still so horribly disappointing to see this happening and to see the shame and dishonor it's bringing to the United States and the weakness that it's bringing to the United States, because the more people lose faith that the United States actually stands for something, the weaker it gets. The more we become like Russia, essentially a kleptocracy, really, and the parallels are all too close. The weaker we become. So even if you only care about strength, even if you only care about defending America, you're achieving the exact opposite by making America weaker.
Spencer, we need to take a break, and when we come back, I believe Chapter 5 is the most recent.
I think it's Chapter 6, actually.
Really? I don't know. I looked today, and all I could get was Chapter 5. I'm going to reload it.
Okay.
I don't see Chapter 6.
Are you at dastardlycleverness.com?
I
am. The top
am.
story should be, maybe your browser needs to have its cache flushed or something, but the top story for me is Chapter 6. It's called What Liberals Don't Stand For.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a break, and you can tell me what I clearly can't read for myself just yet.
Okay.
I'm talking to Spencer Critchley. We're going to do the WCPT Political Book Club when we come right back after this.
The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays at 1 p.m.
Count me among the Americans that want to see change. Now, of course, the change I was looking for would have put Kamala Harris in the White House. Americans voted for change. They just, Trump, I think they got the wrong kind. Still, I'm grateful for elections, even when we lose. They tell us about ourselves, and we can't ignore that and shouldn't.
The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath, Saturdays at 1 p.m.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
We've spoken to Spencer Critchley over the years. He is the author of Patriots of Two Nations. He also hosts a podcast, Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. And on the dastardlycleverness.com website, he is serializing his new book. I'm going to try to figure out why I can't get Chapter 6. All I can get is Chapter 5, but that's a me problem, not a you problem. So, Spencer, tell us about Chapter 6.
Sure. So, Chapter 5, for those who have only got up to there, I'll just quickly say is titled From Marx to Theory to Wokeness, and it gives a very brief history of how we get to the woke left from Karl Marx. Many people on the right say that wokeness is the same thing as Marxism, which is not accurate, but it's not completely untrue. Marx's ideas are among the most important ideas that still inform what people refer to as the woke left. So I give us kind of a capsule history of that in Chapter 5. And then Chapter 6 picks up from there, and it's called What Liberals Don't Stand For. And at this point in the book, we start to contrast, having established an understanding of what the woke left actually is and is not. Now we look at how is that different from the liberal left, and why is it that liberals are not woke and actually can't be woke and still remain liberals. So in this chapter, I actually go back further than Marx and go back to Plato and the and the Old Testament / Hebrew Bible to trace the deep roots of this concept of wokeness and point out that although the point of it is liberation, the point of woke ideology is to liberate people from a system they see as inherently oppressive. The underlying concept from the liberal point of view looks like a form of tyranny. And the reason for that is suggested by that very word, woke. Going back to Plato and going back to the origins of religions based on divine revelation, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there's this idea that there's a higher truth, there's a higher reality behind the world of appearances. And all of us ordinary people are living in a world of appearances where everything we think is real is just an illusion. But when our eyes are opened, we will see the real reality. So in religions, that will be a divine revelation of sacred truth from God. In Plato's Republic, it's a revelation of what he called the forms, the eternal forms of knowledge. So we would see pure reason, basically, and be liberated from all of the illusions and false desires we're imprisoned by. So that's an ancient idea that has persisted throughout history. And if that's the way you think of liberation, the risk is that if you think you have found the one doctrine that leads to that kind of liberation, then at that point you may decide you can't tolerate disagreement with that doctrine. So in religion, when it becomes dogmatic and tyrannical, the priests of that religion will define people who don't follow the doctrine as heretics or infidels. Mm-hmm. And they must be, at least educated to have their eyes opened. They may have to be silenced, and in the worst cases, they have to be killed. And that's a moral decision in each case because you have found the path to higher truth and reality, which will liberate us from error and liberate us from sin. Why would you tolerate people who lead us away from that path because they just lead us into more error and more sin? So that happens in dogmatic religions, but it also happens in dogmatic philosophies. So Plato, who in many ways is, an inspiration towards free thinking, but in his book, The Republic, he's arguing that once you understand the theory of forms, these eternal forms of pure knowledge, then you are a member of an aristocracy, basically, who know better than other people, and you should be in the position of a dictator. He argued for philosopher kings to rule society, because why would you do anything else? Mm-hmm. Human beings, ordinary human beings, are living in this world of illusions, and they're slaves to their impulsive desires, and they're easy to manipulate. So surely society should be ruled by the wisest among us who can perceive the eternal forms of reason.
And now we've just substituted. These people are so wealthy. They're so wealthy. They must be smarter than the rest of us. That must be how they got to be so wealthy. So they believe that they should make all the decisions.
That is a lesson that some people on the right would take, from the concept of aristocracy. But what I'm saying is on the left, this particular form of tyranny is based on knowledge, not wealth or power.
I know, but I think that it's a similar mindset. That to somebody like Elon Musk, why wouldn't he be in charge of all the world's governments?
Exactly. Yeah, and you can see that definitely. You can trace that to this way of thinking as well. So he kind of brings those two worlds together, where he's like a philosopher king, but he's also a sort of Nietzschean, man of action. But to continue the thread from Plato and those ancient and the religious ancient sources, when you get to Marx. Marx thinks he is finally liberating humanity. After all previous history, he's come up with the path that's going to lead to true liberation, and that will involve overthrowing every form of hierarchy. There will be no kings. There will be no philosopher kings. He's even skeptical of philosophers at all. He says the true source of knowledge of reality comes from the workers, what he calls the industrial proletariat. Now, this looks like, at last we've thrown off every form of tyranny, and the workers will lead themselves. And many Marxists would still argue, yes, that's exactly what that means, that it is true liberation. I argue in the book that, in fact, no, Marx ends up having to invent philosopher kings all over again, because he thinks that the workers will achieve what he calls communist consciousness when they wake up, and you can see here we are again with waking up to perception of a higher form of knowledge. They will see that true consciousness means recognizing that they should live in a global commune with each other. There's no reason to have any conflict. There's really no reason for political conflict even, and there should be no more private property, and everybody should live communally, because that's the natural state of human consciousness before it gets corrupted by private property. Now, the thing is, who gets to judge whether or not you've achieved communist consciousness or not? And it turns out Marx has to preserve this class of communist intellectuals who judge that. And that turns out to be true throughout the history of every communist nation. There's always an elect group who protect communist dogma, even against workers who are supposed to be leading the way, and end up having to coerce workers when they stray from the true path. And so I'm tracing this tendency all the way down to the woke left, which once again is another instance of this idea that we have found a way to penetrate all these illusions that keep us imprisoned in a world of illusions and achieve higher awareness. But it turns out you can only do that by mastering the correct theory that's behind this version of wokeness. And it's descended from Marxism, but it's not the same as Marxism. And once again, I'm arguing we end up with this form of tyranny because there are all kinds of opinions that are now illegitimate. So in this worldview, you can't really be a conservative legitimately, for example. Like a liberal, you can be a conservative liberal. And you might be a liberal on the left, and you might disagree with everything conservatives stand for. But if you're a liberal, you don't think that conservatives shouldn't be allowed to speak. You think that you should debate them, right? But in this woke left worldview, actually conservative viewpoints are illegitimate. You don't necessarily want to silence them or put them in jail, but you just don't think they're worth listening to because everything they say simply furthers oppression. It simply furthers all these illusions of individuality and the pursuit of private property, for example, to just keep everybody enslaved. So you don't debate people like that because what they're saying is illegitimate.
Got to take a pause here. We're going to take a break, and I'm very pleased to tell you that I have refreshed, and I now have Chapter 6. So I will see what I can glean over the break in case there's a direction I want to take this. Spencer Critchley is putting his newest book out over his website, dastardlycleverness.com. We're talking about Chapter 6 in our WCPT Book Club. We'll be right back after this.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Every weekday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. on WCPT 820.
Got to turn on my microphone. Joining me is Spencer Critchley. We are discussing Chapter 6 of his new book. You, of course, know him as the author of Patriots of Two Nations. You also know, or should by now, that he hosts a podcast called Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. This book, when it is done, is going to be called The Liberal Backbone. Chapter 6 is what liberals don't stand for, and we were just talking about the idea of whether or not there needs to be, whether or not we need to seek out the other side and talk to them or not, and whether or not believing that you have found enlightenment always leads to tyranny. You have been talking, Spencer, a lot about Plato and Marx. And but I noticed at the end of the chapter, you also segue to Socrates. I know it's kind of a tease for the next chapter, but could you make that segue for the audience?
Sure, and I thank you for that, because I feel a little bad about beating up on Plato so much, because I'm focusing on his book, The Republic, in which he does argue for a dictatorship of philosopher kings who can see the higher reality, while the rest of us are trapped within the world of appearances. But Plato is vast. There's so much in Plato. He was described by Alfred North Whitehead as, Alfred North Whitehead described all of Western philosophy as footnotes to Plato. That's basically how the contribution Plato made. And so there's a lot in Plato that's all about thinking freely and not being a slave to dogma the way I'm describing. And Socrates is one of history's great symbols of freedom of thought. And the important distinction that I would make is, if what you take away from Plato is that we can have a theory that basically explains everything, that's pointing in the direction of certainty, which points in the direction of tyranny. Because if you're certain you're right, people who disagree with you have to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are now intolerant. Essentially, that relationship is tyrannical. If I'm convinced that I've achieved a higher awareness than you, in modern terms, if I'm woke and you're not, well, I just know better than you do. And so, maybe I'll try to educate you, but I may decide that I don't have to listen to you at all. And I may even decide that your ideas are dangerous, because in the woke context, quite likely your ideas are oppressive if you depart from the theory behind wokeness. So certainty leads towards tyranny. Socrates is always asking questions. He's constantly talking about how little he knows. And in fact, one of the most famous quotes from him is he during his trial, he talks about how people told him that people would tell him how smart he was, and he was sure that he knew nothing. And he consulted the oracle at Delphi and said, and asked the oracle at Delphi, who is the wisest of men? And the oracle said, Socrates is. And he tried to figure out why that was, and he realized it was because he knew that he knew nothing. And that made him unlike almost all other Athenians, who were all sure they knew a whole lot. And Socrates, the only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't be sure about anything. So I would say that's a wellspring of liberalism, because liberalism at its best is based on the principle, basically, that we can't know for sure. Liberalism imposes the absolute minimal number of axioms that you're required to believe in, and they amount to really respecting the rights of everybody to believe whatever they want, as long as they're not harming other people. And liberalism says we don't know, we're not going to claim that there is a one supreme religion or one supreme philosophy that tells us the right way to live. We're only going to assert that everybody has equal rights, and they have the equal right to be free. And it's better for us to live together that way, nonviolently and cooperatively, than all of the alternatives that history has produced, where we don't tolerate people who disagree with us so often, and we resort to violence to resolve disputes. So
Spencer,
Socrates
you just touched on something that I don't, that always is a puzzle to me. This idea that, like, if whatever you believe doesn't infringe on my life, then you should just be free to believe it. The whole idea that people get so upset about trans people when there's such a minuscule amount, or get offended by the very idea of somebody being gay, when it doesn't affect them at all. It doesn't affect any aspect of their life. Why is it that people can't just absorb that? I may not agree with you. I may think that you are completely wrong. But if your wrongness doesn't impinge on my life in any way, what does it matter?
Yeah, well, the thing about uncertainty is that it's terrifying. And let's remember, Socrates was put to death.
There is that, isn't there?
One way of looking at Socrates, I would say, is that he's sort of the Jesus of rationality. He is killed, much like Jesus was. Jesus had this radical message of love for everybody. The core of his message was love and compassion. And that was considered extremely dangerous and revolutionary.
Well, apparently it still is. Bishop Buddy speaking to Donald Trump about mercy, and Donald Trump talking about what a horrible, nasty person she was because, she was imploring him to be merciful to people. I mean, if you're a Christian and you support that guy, I don't know how you reconcile things like that.
Yeah, well, for phony Christians, there's little in the world that's more offensive than, an eruption of actual Christian values. And similarly to how we started off with Pete Hegseth versus Mark Milley, right? Trump and Hegseth are paragons of dishonor who are offended by an honorable person like Milley.
Without question.
Mm-hmm. So, the thing about what I'm trying to do in the book, to get back to Socrates, Plato, and all this, I want to avoid dragging people too far into the weeds of philosophy, as interesting as I find it, and just sort of pick out the highlights that I think are most meaningful and that explain how we got where we are today. And one of those core things is just this concept that there is a higher awareness, and we found out how to get it. And once you have it, your mind is liberated from the illusions that are keeping you otherwise imprisoned. And as I said, I point out that in Plato's Republic with the theory of the forms, and then I find it again in Marx, and you find it in dogmatic religions. And then I could get into all kinds of complexity between Marx and today's woke left, but I don't think most people need to wade through all that complexity. It's this core idea that's so important, because what's preserved all the way through over really 2,500 years is the idea that there's this path to a higher form of awareness that will liberate you from your illusions. And the way that's working with today's woke left is it's a sort of a mixture of Marx, postmodern philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and some other influences. Again, I don't get into all the details because I don't think most people are all that interested or even actually need to in order to understand this core idea. Where we are now with the woke left is the belief that every aspect of Western capitalist society is an artificial construction, that essentially a construction of illusions designed to keep us oppressed. So that almost anything you say in English, if you've grown up in the Western tradition or in other sort of Western European language like German or French, is an assertion of power over other people. To simply refer to somebody, to identify them as, for example, male or female, is an assertion of power over their gender identity.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, because there's a young woman I stumbled across on TikTok, and, seriously, she seemed like she was in her early 20s, and she was saying, if you wonder why Republicans are so set on this idea of there's only two genders, a man and a woman, and whatever you're born with, and she said it's because if they want to be able to establish a hierarchy so that there is an order of dominance. Yeah. And, if there's some sort of gray area between men and women, we know men are on top of women and men should dominate women. But if there's this gray area, it sort of throws that into disarray. I thought that was really interesting.
No, that's quite true. And there's a lot of insights from this theory, which is often referred to now as just theory for short. A longer name for it would be postmodern critical theory. But there are a lot of insights in theory that liberals can wholeheartedly recognize. I mean, it is true there are hierarchies of power. It is true that powerful people very often get to define reality. It is true that there's such a thing as patriarchy, and that people who are threatened by fluid gender identities don't like the idea. It's not true of all of them, but many of them don't like the idea that straight men might not be in charge anymore, just like there are lots of, straight white men who who don't like the idea that they might not be in charge anymore because of racial hierarchies. And it's demonstrable that these things are all socially constructed, and they are illusory. The whole idea of white identity, there's nothing real about that. That was invented at a certain point to justify enslaving Africans. So there are a lot of these insights that I completely agree with. Where the tyranny creeps in is when you insist that only theory explains this properly. And if you're not having a debate within the framework established by theory, then that debate is essentially not legitimate. And in fact, it's probably just perpetuating all these oppressive illusions. That's where it becomes tyrannical. Because you can come to all of these insights through liberalism, or just through free thinking, whether you define it as liberalism or not. You don't need a particular ideology. You can study history and sociology and psychology and come up with these insights that way. But the dogmatic theorists insist that you must do it within the framework of theory. And a framework like that is like a corral around. If you think of thoughts like wild horses, what's happening here is all those horses are now allowed to roam free as long as they're in the corral. But if they're not in the corral of theory, then, that's not a legitimate discussion. And that's where it becomes tyrannical. And that's where you can see this through line from Plato in the Republic through Marx, through the history since Marx, to postmodern critical theory. And in each case, we have what I call the paradox of liberation. The goal is to liberate people's minds, but it turns out they can't really be free because they have to think according to this doctrine in order to be liberated. And if they're not following this doctrine, by definition, they're not liberated, so therefore it's illegitimate. So this is a very important distinction, and this is why this chapter of The Liberal Backbone is called What Liberals Don't Stand For. You can certainly believe all these ideas from theory. Liberals would say, of course you get to believe this stuff, but you're not going to be a liberal if you adopt those ideas, because liberals want to live in a world where we have the maximum range of opinions, even the ones we very strongly disagree with. In a liberal society, also known as an open society, people even get to be wrong. They even get to make really big mistakes as long as they're not actually harming people. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is we just believe in it as a right that we believe in. We think that freedom is a good thing in itself. But also that tends to produce the most creative societies, because ideas that look beyond the pale, outside the permissible framework of thought today, or offensive or just crazy, often those, many of them turn out they are just offensive, they are crazy, they are just stupid, they are just wrong. But some of them turn out to be the next great breakthrough. And it's simply being exposed to ideas we disagree with, even if we're not persuaded, it helps to make us smarter through having to confront them and think through them. So that's the sort of liberal point of view on all this.
Spencer, we need to take another break. When we come back, I want to talk about the way you end Chapter 6. The scary thing about that kind of freedom, liberal freedom, is that it can feel a lot like being lost. I want to explore that. Spencer Critchley and I will be right back after this.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon, or HeartlandSignal.com. Just search for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Attention listeners, financial planners, CPAs, and divorce attorneys. Are you wondering why your mortgage professional hasn't returned your calls? Well, they might be one of the over 165,000 mortgage professionals who didn't renew their license over the past 24 months. If you want to buy a home or refinance the one you've got, do what I did. Call Team Hochberg, our trusted local lender. In the past 2 years, while other companies have been shutting down, Team Hochberg has been adding loan officers and is stronger than ever. They'd love to earn your business. In the past 24 months, mortgage companies have closed and over 165,000 loan officers have exited the profession. Team Hochberg has expanded and is stronger than ever. If you'd like to work with experienced mortgage professionals, do what I did. Call Team Hochberg now, 855-5 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. That number again, 855-563-2843, or go online, 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Spencer Critchley, author of Patriots of Two Nations, is writing a new book that he is releasing chapter by chapter. It is called The Liberal Backbone, and we have been talking today about Chapter 6. You can find the chapters at dastardlycleverness.com, which Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good is also the name of his podcast. Today's chapter wraps up with this. One of the most important characteristics of liberal freedom is that it allows for there to be many answers or none. The scary thing about that kind of freedom is that it can feel a lot like being lost, and people will do a lot to avoid that feeling. Why does it feel like being lost, Spencer?
Right, because liberalism uniquely makes no claim to offer what's sometimes called a theory of the good. Liberalism doesn't promise to answer the biggest questions in life. Like, how do we know what the good life is? How do we know what the meaning of life is? Liberalism says liberalism is not going to answer those questions for you. You have to answer those questions for yourself. And so in a liberal society, you are not required to be a member of any particular religion. And you are not required to be a member of any particular ethnic tribe or race. You have minimal requirements placed on you, which amount to, respecting the Constitution of the liberal nation you live in. And you're left on your own to figure out, why are we here? What does all of this mean? Does it mean anything? On your own. So if you find that in your church or mosque or temple, fine, but if you're an atheist, fine. If you think there's no answer, you're a nihilist, fine. That's all part of your private life, but we're not going to provide you with that answer. Now, the trouble is, people find it very difficult to live that way, and this is why people still turn towards religion, or they turn towards other spiritual practices.
Because they want certainty. They want somebody to tell them what's what and who's who.
People don't want questions. They want answers. They don't want Socrates. They want Plato's theory of the forms. They don't want Jesus ultimately. They want priests, the priests who came after Jesus, to tell them exactly what to do, because it's much easier. Jesus talked, and I'm sounding somewhat like a Christian evangelizer here, and I don't mean to, but I think Jesus, whether you're actually Christian or not, is a great moral philosopher. Jesus, if you actually read what he said, he talks about fulfilling the law, but he's talking about the spirit of the law. He doesn't go on and on about the details of do this, do that. But it turns out people are much more comfortable when people tell them, do this, do that, which explains part of the appeal, much of the appeal of an authoritarian like Trump, because he answers all your questions for you. He gives you easy answers to the questions. And you don't need to live in anxiety and fear anymore, because all of these questions are answered for you. And if you believe in somebody you think of as a strong man, including such an obvious fraud as Trump, then you think he's so powerful and he's so smart, he'll make it okay, and now I can relax. So this is the huge challenge of liberalism, and I'm sure that this is why liberalism is in so much trouble right now from the right, from the anti-liberal right in the form of MAGA, but also from the anti-liberal left, which is the woke left, based on this theory I've been describing, which also purports to essentially give you answers to all your questions, because all you need to do is apply theory to everything that comes up. And now you can put it within a framework that explains everything. So anytime you're having a disagreement with somebody, you can establish the framework of theory. And if they are not operating within that framework, you don't have to pay attention to their opinions, because their opinions are wrong and quite likely dangerous.
In the research that you've been doing, does it indicate why some people are so uncomfortable with uncertainty? Or the opposite of that, why some people are?
Yeah, well, there are personality types. I mean, it turns out that liberals on the left, as personalities, psychologically tend to be more comfortable with uncertainty and with change. But even on the left, we get people splitting off into this anti-liberal left where they want to have a rigid theoretical framework that explains everything. And that's eliminating uncertainty. And the deep reason for that, I would say, is elucidated beautifully by a guy named Ernest Becker in a book published a few decades ago called The Denial of Death. And he argues that essentially this comes down to the terror of death, that we invent philosophies, religions, and ideologies because we're terrified at the awareness that we are going to die. And it's almost impossible to face that reality without thinking there must be some reason for it, or it can't actually be true that somehow there's life after death, or somehow we at least have a virtual immortality through being remembered and having a family and having our life be meaningful. But the idea that there might be nothing to it at all beyond the bare facts that you're born, you live, you suffer sometimes, you are happy other times, and then you die and you've gone into oblivion is extremely hard for people to face. Yeah. And so they will turn to a religion or a philosophy or more recently an ideology and cling to almost anything, any set of beliefs rather than face this terror of death. Well, so I think that it's a basic psychological drive. Now, liberalism, in order to survive, I think has to provide answers without becoming a dogma. And I think that's possible, but I think maybe we could talk about that next time.
Yes. I'm pretty comfortable with uncertainty. I also am an atheist, and I believe, sadly, that once I die, I am going to be extinguished as a creature. And that's terrifying, but it is what it is. And being, if you can tell me about ghosts and you can tell me about a beautiful cloud-like afterlife, but that doesn't make it so. I don't know, Spencer. But I've always been an outlier. I guess I've always been a little bit odd. That's what my parents would tell you. Anyway, Spencer Critchley is going to be back to talk about the next chapter in his book. And I hope you will join us for the WCPT Book Club when that happens. Spencer, thank you so much for being here today. It is always so much fun to talk with you.
Oh, I totally agree, Joan. Thank you.
That's going to do it for me. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez is, of course, up next. Richard Chu will be here tomorrow at 6 a.m. I don't think Patty's in tonight. I think that Dwayne Kennedy and Adam Burke are going to be co-hosting Patty's show tonight. But Richard Chu will be here tomorrow at 6 a.m., and he's going to talk to Tony Preckwinkle. That should be good. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to be talking to the Atlantic's Tom Nichols, which should be a great conversation. Have a great evening, my friends. Good night.